Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Salma Bermudez Advanced Fermentation Process Colombia from Manhattan Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Manhattan, based out of Rotterdam, Netherlands, and this will likely be a bit longer of a review, as this is arguably our most anticipated review of 2022. Once this coffee was released, we were bombarded with messages asking whether or not we were going to be reviewing this coffee. And the answer was always, of course. I was just looking to pair it with another coffee from Manhattan and order it directly from their website. And the Jansen 600 gave me that perfect opportunity. But let me go ahead and give you a brief history of the Bermudez line of coffees, which began with the Diego Bermudez several years ago. And it's a coffee that I had at a coffee shop. And at that time, it was one of the most well-structured cups of coffee I had ever had. And it was followed up with the Lady Bermudez, which is one of the most discussed coffees of the last several years. And it's a coffee that a lot of people have described as their favorite coffee of all time. And it's a coffee I describe as both transcendent and the best coffee that I have reviewed on this channel at this point. And that was followed up with the Luna Bermudez, which is another coffee that a lot of people have described as just as good, if not better, than the Lady Bermudez. And those are two of our 7 most viewed reviews on this channel. So it's safe to say the expectations for this coffee and this review are both sky high. So I'm really hoping that this review will do this coffee justice. This right here is day 30 of this coffee. And recipe we have for Manhattan is a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 208 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this coffee better through the Chemex, and we'll discuss that a lot towards the end of this video. And that would indicate a more medium grind for this coffee. Manhattan is a European light for the roast profile. And with all of that out of the way, let's start discussing this coffee. So day 5, first impression, and I had a novel of first impressions. And one adjective that I'm going to use to describe this coffee is Letty-esque, which most specifically defines that very sugary stone fruit that comes from Lady Bermudez in general. But it had that aroma based off the first grind. The cup itself wasn't quite as directed as either Letty or Luna both were. Those were very pointed cups of coffee. So Letty was very peach forward and Luna was very blueberry forward, but this one here didn't specifically skew in one direction on that first impression. The aspect that captivated me the most was this sugar cinnamon finish, but it was encompassed by this strong fruit sweetness. So I call this coffee complex and captivating from that first try. Day 8 ran the coffee through the V60 and was sharing similar experiences to previous Bermudez coffees, as it really did kind of tone down the unique wildness of the cup of coffee. A little more dominant in the cinnamon sweetness, but with a lot less of those lively fruits coming from the cup of coffee. Day 11, coffee was really intensifying in the cinnamon output, but the most noticeable thing was this burst of wonderful fruit that kind of hits you as the cup of coffee cools down. This coffee definitely improves the more it has cooled down, definitely slightly above room temperature, and that's when you're getting these explosion of really wild flavors. The coffee has that it factor, the vibrant Letty vibes, and it was just really incredible on this third time trying it. Day 15, best to the V60 at that point, as it had a sharper focus on the candy-like fruit, and that's that Letty-esque factor that I described. Cinnamon, pretty heavy forward pronounced, but the cup really shined at the cooler temperatures where I was radiating that Letty-like fruit finish. Amazing vibe, amazing cup, just really impressive once again on day 15. Day 18 ran the coffee through the Chemex, and it slightly alters as it feels a little bit brighter, and it's less fruit focused on the cup of coffee on this day, which isn't necessarily a common theme. This coffee, if I have one pretty common critique, was that it could be a little inconsistent. I think it was a little more sensitive to the brew than I was anticipating, and the cup of coffee changes so much from the time that you're drinking it, as you just pick up so many different factors from the cup of coffee that it can be a little, we'll just use the term sensitive from time to time. Day 21, continuing to see strong Letty-like fleshy fruits in the cup of coffee, as it is slightly funky in that sense. And that's what I said about Lady Bermudez. The first impression was that it was slightly funky, but the funkiness is directed in a pretty nice sense, as it's a very kind of sugary candy-like funkiness. Interestingly, plenty of brown candy to the cup as well, but it's the cinnamon that really radiates in the finish, and is quite pleasant yet again. Day 24 is seeing a bit more diversity in the cup on this day, as there's a strong abundance of cinnamon in the finish. It is really at its best once it has cooled down, and it skews a little bit more towards the cinnamon than the wild fleshy fruits on that day. And then day 27, Cup seems to be skewing even heavier in the brightness today, as the cup feels the brightest it's ever been with a strong acidity. The finish is very long and lasting cinnamon, often hard to replicate the same cup of coffee twice. And I think that's an important note that I put at the bottom, was because I was never getting the same cup of coffee from this 2 times that I was brewing it. And it could have been the fact that I kept adjusting between the V60 and the Chemex to kind of get a better overall impression of this cup of coffee. But I'm going to go ahead and put up 2 tasting wheels right now so you can see why I've been highlighting and emphasizing the V60 and Chemex difference so much. And I'm going to put the Chemex to this side right here, and I'm going to put the V60 to this side right here so you can see the differences. But let me run through the V60 first, since it's the one I liked a little bit less. And the major differences on this one is the acidity is a little higher and the florals are a little lower. And I haven't discussed the florals too much because it's something I wanted to discuss more with the tasting wheel, as I felt it was a lot more pronounced through the Chemex, and it was a very, very strong and pronounced floral component to this cup of coffee. This right here is brewed through the Chemex, and I'm experiencing so much more of the florals coming from it. And the V60 made it feel like a slightly more acidic cup of coffee, and that's why those 2 things are flipped. But the other important things that are flipped are the caramel, which is higher through the Chemex and it is lower through the V60, and then the savoriness and the bitterness, because I feel like the Chemex really strips away the kind of negative aspects of this cup of coffee and really highlights and emphasizes the positive components, most distinctly and noticeably the spice and the stone fruit, which regardless is at a level 5 for both tasting wheels, as is the finish, the sweetness, and the cleanliness is at a level 4, which it is a little funky, and I don't think any of the Bermudez line of coffees have finished at a level 5 for cleanliness, so don't expect it to be the cleanest cup of coffee you've ever had, but it is an advanced fermentation processed Colombia. So those are the differences. Body, the only difference between these 2 tasting wheels as well, as you can see that one's a little higher than the other. That's pretty common with so many of these coffees, as in so many of our reviews we say that you'll just get a little bit more body with the V60. But for the most part, honestly, the rest of the tasting wheels are pretty similar, and I think that they're both extremely accurate representations of what I was getting for both brew methods. This is the first time I've ever kind of compared and contrasted the 2 different brew methods on this video, so you can kind of see, but it did make a pretty significant difference with this cup of coffee, and it's something I felt has been similar with both the Letty and Luna Bermudez coffees as well, as I liked those both better through the Chemex, and I think the Chemex has just done an amazing job of really emphasizing the positive aspects of all the Bermudez line of coffees. So I think right here, that's about as good as I can do with these tasting wheels, and I think that they're both really accurate from what I'm getting from this coffee. All right, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. First and foremost, it's not Letty, and I still think that Letty set the needle and set the bar so high that all of the coffees are still trying to reach that bar, and even if you kind of reach it and don't necessarily surpass it, you still can't earn that same sort of transcendent title as Letty did. That being said, this coffee is wild, it's out there, and I think, if I'm being completely honest, I liked the slight bit more complexity to this cup of coffee than I did with the Luna Bermudez. I still don't think it's quite as good as Diego. I'm still just blown away by Diego, and I'm still blown away by Letty, but I think this is one of easily the best cups of coffee I've had this year, and I think maybe it didn't necessarily live up to the wild and ridiculous expectations that Letty Bermudez have set, but even if you take it in its own right, in its own context, and separate it from the other Bermudez line of coffees, this coffee could be labeled transcendent just as well as Letty and Luna both were. So for that sense, I think that this is a really impressive and well done cup of coffee, and assuming it holds up, this should in theory finish pretty high in our top 10 coffees of 2022 list, as I think Manhattan did another impressive job with another impressive Bermudez coffee. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, it skews very heavy in those 2 directions. The cinnamon was probably the most pronounced characteristic to this cup of coffee. It was more pronounced in the Chemex for me, as were the stone fruits actually. And they have mango listed on here. Yes, 100%. It is very mango direct. And in that sense, if you love cinnamon and you love mango and you love really sweet cups of coffee, I think this is an excellent fit for you. I think it's an excellent fit for so many people that are looking for unique coffees that aren't poorly done, because the biggest complaint I have about unique coffees is that they're overbearing. This isn't overbearing. And the other big issue I have is that they're too boozy, and this has no booze to it, and that they're too funky, and this has very minimal funk to the actual taste of the coffee itself. So that's about as good as you can do with these advanced coffees, and that's why I describe them as being so transcendent. I think that's the best way I can leave this review. I think that's the best I could do for this coffee. But hopefully this was sufficient for you, and hopefully you guys have your own thoughts and impressions of this coffee. As I've had a lot of feedback about this coffee, I would still appreciate any additional thoughts and impressions of this from you guys as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But this right here has been a review of the Salma Bermudez Advanced Fermentation Processed Colombia from Manhattan Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.